this is a new medium and it's exciting. So we're going to be talking about turnout. The way I want to structure it is my hope is that we talk a little bit about turnout, talk about some ways in which we compensate and get turnout from other places, and then start to give you some tools in your toolkit to strengthen your turnout muscles and condition them, so to speak, so that you can have healthier turnout in the studio when we get back and when you're doing classes here online. I think, it's really unfortunate that we are all stuck inside, but this is also like a pretty great opportunity for us to hone areas in which we were a little bit shaky before in our technique, right? So when we get back in the studio, we come back a little bit stronger in some respects. And then at about 6, we are going to open up the floor for some Q&A, and I hope to be done by about 6:15. As I mentioned before, I'm gearing this mostly towards dancers. So I'm going to try to keep my language and information like at that level. Clinicians obviously would love to hear some of your input too at the end if you have extra things that you like to look for, but this will be basically like a basic overview. Okay, so turnout. We use it in almost all forms of Western dance, right? It was this little thing that Louis XIV gave to us in the 17th century, which has obviously taken on a completely different look since he introduced it. Hey, Carrie. And right now, like what literature tells us is that about 60% of our turnout is going to be coming from our hips, with the other 40% coming from natural rotation from other structures. What we're going to focus on a lot today is the hips, period. Right? Because we want to generate most of our turnout from this area. I want to give you exercises and tools to make sure that you can get as much as possible from here, so we don't have to try to beg, borrow, and steal from other parts of our body, aka compensate, to create the line that we want to see. So let's see. I think we're going to start by introducing you to the 6 deep hip external rotators, right? So where our turnout should come from in our hips are our 6 deep external rotators. So Kinnison is going to stand up and show us where this is on our body. So she's going to turn to the side and she's going to show us that they kind of start on the outside of your femur or your leg bone. And for those of you who are kind of having trouble figuring out like where exactly, if you like palpate and feel the outside of your hip and you feel the big like bony part of your hip on the side, they generally start there and then they run all the way back to your sacrum. So they're kind of go along the line that Kinnison is describing with her hands. And what I think is super important to note too is that they are underneath your big glute muscles, right? So we all know our big glute muscles, our glute max. It's the one that gives our butt nice shape. Hi, Rob. Nice. Thanks for joining. So they run underneath the glute max muscle and all your other glute muscles. So they're super deep. And it's really hard, I think, for dancers to feel these muscles working unless we bring them to fatigue. So sometimes when we're teaching people how to use these muscles, I sense that dancers get a little bit frustrated as they're trying to find them for the first time. So all 6 of these need to be able to work pretty consistently to help you hold your turnout. And they also help with stability of what we call the femoral acetabular joint, which is where your femur meets your pelvis, aka your hip joint. Right, and Kinnison is pointing there right now. So ways in which we can compensate in our turnout. So if we, like, for example, let's say our body is only able to hold 100 degrees turnout, but our ballet teacher is telling us we need 180. Like, there are a couple ways to beg, borrow, and steal. I'm not getting into any kind of like, your body can only only has 130 degrees of external rotation, for example. We're just going to give you a hypothetical. So let's say that you, as a human, can only hold 100 degrees, but your dance teacher wants you to have 180 degrees turnout. So where are a few places we can get some extras? So Kinnison, let's actually have you turn to the side. We'll start from the top down. I won't give you everything, but I'll give you a fair amount of things, right? So the first thing is we can go into what's called an anterior pelvic tilt or you can stick your derriere out, let your abs go. You get a little bit of like wiggle room in your ligaments in your hips so that you can turn out a little bit more from your hips. So that's one way of turning out. The other way is to do the exact opposite and to clench your butt or your glute max, right? So you can kind of see that someone loved that. I agree. I see that a lot, butt clenchers. So you can actually see like quite a bit of definition in the glutes there, right? And you can almost see that she's tucking under a little bit as well. And people try to kind of hold on for dear life in this position as well, but it's going to really inhibit how you move, right? And what we didn't say about the anterior pelvic tilt, will you go there, Kinnison? But you're putting a couple muscles that are super important for stability of the hip and the low back at a disadvantage, like your core muscles, right? Because they're in a bit of a stretched position here and it's hard for them to work, as well as your glutes and your deep hip external rotators. So we went through those two things. Another thing we can do, so we talked about 60% coming from the hip, but then another good chunk coming from other places. We can torque from the knee, which, Kinnison, I won't really have you do. But
hard.
Yeah, it's hard and it makes me cringe. But basically what happens is that a dancer can kind of use the force, use the friction of the floor to kind of plie themselves into a 180 degree, right? And then kind of force extra turnout from the knee joint itself. And then otherwise, I mean, using the floor for friction, you can big, borrow, and steal from the ankle and from the foot and a whole bunch of, not a whole bunch in those areas as well. Okay, so we went through some ways to compensate, right? Now, what we're going to, we're about to take you into some exercises that will hopefully help you to start to stabilize the pelvis and by using the core, and then additionally helping you to tap into some of those deep hip external rotators without using some of the compensatory muscles that we often see, because there's some simple exercises that a lot of us see in the PT clinic on a day-to-day basis, but it's really hard to do them really well. So before we get into all of that, I'm also going to have Kinnison help me familiarize all of you with some important muscles that I'll be referring to for the rest of today. So the first one is your TFL, and her pants are actually kind of perfect for this. So the TFL is approximately like where her fingers are running right there. And that's one of the muscles that sometimes tries to help us turn out a little extra, but we don't really want it to help us do the majority of the work. The second one is the psoas. I think I might mention this like once or twice. The psoas is really important for, psoas, not sartorius. So the psoas is really important. So actually, Kinnison, move your bottom finger in a little bit. There you go. Thank you. So the psoas is super important for lumbar spine or lower back stability, into hip stability, and it also helps with hip flexion. And then the second to last one, we already talked about this, the deep hip external rotators. She'll describe them again. So that goes from the bony part of your hip back to your sacrum. And there's 6 of these guys, but they're very small, but they're also mighty. So we're going to keep those in mind. And then the last thing is your glute med, because we're also going to use this. We talked about your glute max, which is the shape of your butt, but your glute med is about where Kinnison's fingers are. I think it's important to describe where it starts and where it attaches. So it starts all the way up by your iliac crest. Great. And then she's going to trace it all the way down, and it goes to the head of your not the head, it goes to your femur. Sorry, that like the bony outside part of your femur, not your head, of your femur. My apologies, clinicians listening. So that is going to be super important for holding your hips steady when you're standing on one leg, which obviously we access our turnout when we're standing on one leg all the time. So, okay. Without further ado, we're going to take you through a bunch of exercises. For those of you who are joining us and like actually following along some of the exercises, we're going to do like a little bit of a pre-test and a post-test. So that is that we're going to stand in a first position. We're going to hold our arms out a la seconde. Can I save the video? Yes, I can save the video. My plan is to attempt to do that at the end of this. We're going to hold our hands a la second and arms a la second. And what we're going to do is we're going to tendu 4 times croix. And as we're doing this, what I really want you to do, so Kinnison, let's make your tendus a little bit faster. So as you're doing this, I want you to kind of keep in mind, like, okay, do I feel like I'm on my standing leg? Do I feel like I'm pulling off my standing leg? Is there something in me that's a little bit off, or do I feel pretty solid, etc.? And then what we're going to do, and you can go the other side when you're done with this, is we're going to come back to this at the end and kind of take note of what has changed or what has stayed the same. Kinnison used to be a ballet dancer. This looks great. Okay, great. All right, so now we're going to take you through 4 exercises. The first exercise is for a little bit of core stability, right? Because without a stable core, ooh, good, she has a mat. Let's actually, Kinnison, if you don't mind. Okay, oh, you can also bring me down. Perfect. Without a stable core, it's hard to get our turnout muscles in an efficient position, right? So that they can work the best way for you. So what's going to happen here is she's going to start by bringing one leg, her upstage leg, up towards her chest. Let's actually go a little bit closer to your chest than 90. Good. She's going to relax her knee, and she's going to flex her foot. She's going to take her downstage arm, her left arm, and she's going to put it on the front of her thigh towards her knee, and she's going to give it a super gentle push. So this is not like an all forces, go. This is just a little bit so she can start to feel her psoas kick in and her core muscles kick in. The other thing she's going to know is she's going to take her upstage arm and she's going to put it on her TFL, which we showed you where that was. And she's going to make sure that that TFL is still a little bit squishy, right? Because if that starts to take over, we know we're starting to push too much in the knee. So one thing I also tend to find is people have an easier time turning off the TFL if they bring their knee a little closer towards their chest. Okay, so that's part 1. We're going to add the second part. So Kinnison is going to bring her left knee up to meet her right. And what she's going to do is she's going to try to maintain both of her hips on the ground, and she's going to let her left knee fall out slowly to the side. So left knee falls out, but she's maintaining both hips on the ground. Good. And then she'll come back. So Kinnison's doing a really nice job respecting the amount that she can control, right? So she's not just falling out to the side because, it looks better, but she's really respecting how much control she has in her core and her hips. So we're going to go ahead. I don't know what number you're on, but we're going to call this 4. And then we're going to do 4 more to get to 8. And then if you're starting to feel your superficial hip flexors turn on, like your TFL, then stop, take a break. We don't want you to fall into compensatory patterns. Go ahead and switch your sides, Kinnison. We'll do 8 on the other side. We would prefer that you work in a way that's going to be efficient and effective for you when you come to standing. So she's going to go ahead and do 8 on that side as well. Good. And again, she's keeping both sides of her hip on the ground, and she's thinking about that psoas connection and the deep core muscles also working. And she's counting to 8 because I can't talk and count at the same time. 4? 4 more. Okay, great. 4 more.
Okay, that's 8.
Okay, great. 8 or 1 more, whatever. Okay, excellent. So hopefully Kinnison should feel her abdominals having turned on a little bit. She's nodding her head. That's excellent. Good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take you into a classic, which is often performed pretty wrong, which is the clamshell. So this is not quite right this exercise is not perfect for everyone. And there's, I would say, in my personal experience, like 1 to 2 times out of 10, I don't give the clamshell right away, and I actually have to wait for a while until I reintroduce it. And the reason is because a lot of people like to perform this movement with muscles that shouldn't be the predominant movers. So for example, the TFL. So what I like to do is have the person performing the movement kind of touch their TFL to begin with, and say, okay, is it squishy? It should be squishy. And then we're going to check in with this muscle a little bit later to make sure that it remains squishy and then it hasn't taken over to do the exercise. But what then I like to cue the dancer to think about is, remember where we showed you those deep hip external rotators are? So, and then I'll say, you know, Kinnison, can you put your hand on your deep hip external rotator? So she's going to put it on her greater trochanter, which is the bony part on the side of her leg, and kind of then on her sacrum. And she's almost going to think about making like a Pac-Man type of hand here. She's going to like kind of squeeze along where her deep hip external rotators are and think about most of the movement coming from there. And she's going to rotate her knee up towards the ceiling. Good. And then she's going to come on down. Good. And then as she comes down, she can kind of let the hand open up a little bit. So clenches it, and so it, not clenches, I don't like that word, but brings the fingers together as she does her clamshell, and then slowly opens up her fingers as it comes down. Okay, so now, Kinnison, let's check in with that TFL. Someone wanted to know what the TFL was, or said TFL question mark. It's the tensor fasciae lata. I encourage you to go back when I save this, just to like hear a tiny bit more about it. I didn't go too in depth about it, but she's going to keep her fingers there and she's going to see, okay, am I compensating? Am I using my TFL too much? And if she is, then that muscle is going to start to tense up under her fingertips. And so I would encourage her, go ahead and pause for a second, Kinnison. I would encourage her, if she starts to feel a lot of TFL action kick in at the very end, then I might have her limit her range until she can control it. Either that, or I would ask her to check in too and say, okay, let's use our hand for something else, right? So Kinnison, keep your hand on your hip, and I want you to make sure that your hip is not rotating. And what I often see is when someone lifts their knee towards the ceiling, they actually rotate their hips back. Do you want it? Yeah, upstage. So go ahead and, yeah, exactly. Can you do that? And exactly. And that actually gets them like into kind of a TFL compensatory pattern. So that was a little more towards a clinician cue thing. But anyway, I would make sure for dancers that your hips are staying right on top of each other, that your TFL is quiet, and that you're mostly thinking about initiating the movement from your deep hip external rotators. So Kinnison, you've done like a trillion. Let's go to the other side and I'll talk about setup one more time. What angle is best for the clam? Well, that's a great question. I think first of all, like for setup, for someone learning this, I have found that you really need to play around and find what angle is best for them. But then the truth of the matter is, we use Turnout and a whole bunch of different, oh, sorry, I'm going to go through the queuing. Give me 1 second. A whole bunch of different angles, right? So I personally don't subscribe to the fact that any one angle of hip flexion is better than another. And we're about to go into another exercise where we work and turn out with hip and neutral. So Kinnison, what I typically give for individuals is the following. So I'm actually going to have Kinnison put her head all the way down the ground, because when she's up like that in the kind of like Jane Fonda moment, her like waist can collapse into the floor. And I think this gives her the most effective position in which she can stabilize her core and use it in more efficient position. So then she's going to put her hand on her hips. So her ear, her shoulder, and her greater trochanter, or like the side of the hip, should be in one line. And then my initial starting position, and again, it changes based on the individual, is the heels in lines with the sit bone, like someone mentioned before. But if they can't tackle that, then I move around. So we're going to start, Kinnison, with, first of all, make sure your TFL is squishy. Good. Then you're going to put your fingers on where the deep hip external rotators start, and then where they go ahead and attach, great, towards the sacrum. And you'll think about bringing your fingertips closer together as your knee comes up towards the ceiling, and relax. And she'll just do 2 more in this position. 1, and relax. And this is also a really great place like to talk to dancers about what their core is doing. I see a lot of people with the kind of extension or like arching in their thoracolumbar junction or in their low back area, up towards where it meets their thoracic spine. And if they need if anyone needs a little bit more feedback, then sometimes I put them against the wall. Okay, thank you, Kinnison. So we have gone through 2 of our 4 exercises. The first one was for core stabilization. The second one is talking you through the clamshell and how I like to cue it to make sure we're getting deep hip external rotators. And it's also using our turnout when our hip is in a flex position, which we do obviously in dance. So another way in which we use our turnout is when our hip is in no flexion or neutral, right? No flexion, no extension, etc. And that would be, very much like when we're standing on one leg as the exercise that Kinnison showed us before and tonduing. So what she is going to do is lie on her side of choice. Great. And against the wall is a great one. Yes, exactly. I also like it so they can't roll backwards. I think the wall is great for a lot of things, especially when people can't really figure out where their body is in space quite yet. Okay, so Kinnison is going to put her right hand on her hip. Great. And she's going to super make sure, like, her hand is going to be used to make sure that she's not getting any extra motion that goes up into her spine. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. So she's going to straighten her top leg. Great. Going to move up a little bit. Okay, so if from a bird's eye view, her ankle, her hip, her shoulder, and her ear should be in one line. What I find, and Kinnison, relax your leg for a second because otherwise it's going to burn. What I often find is that dancers tend to start to bring their leg forward a lot in this, but that starts to turn on muscles that we don't necessarily want to be using predominantly in this exercise. So go ahead, Kinnison, again, sorry. Straighten the leg. She's going to start with the foot on the ground. Top foot on the ground, good. Then she's going to raise it. Raise the top leg so it's about parallel to the ground. Great. So what we noticed just now is that Kinnison did not bring her top leg up so much that she started to feel her right hip hike. And can you show us what that would look like, Kinnison? Yeah, you see, as everyone see that? So she's only, yeah, her hip's moving. So she's only going to bring her leg up off the ground. So start from the ground again, Kinnison. Only going to bring her leg up so much, right before it starts to come into her hip motion. No, thank you. Okay, so Kinnison, if you can, keep your right hip on right hand on your hip, please. So from here, I actually want her to flex her foot. I find that this helps and gets us out of like a particular dance position, right? And I want her to think about turning out her hip from her thigh. So we got a little rotisserie chicken moment here. Good. And then she's going to come back into neutral. And then from here, she's actually going to go into turn in. Good, because our turnout muscles need to be able to work in all positions. And then she's going to come back to neutral and she's going to turn out. Kinnison, go ahead and do 5. I'm just going to talk over you as you're doing this. So some things that we are looking for in this, right? So number 1, we're looking for a space hold in the thigh to make sure that we're not trying to get motion from other parts of the body, right? We're also looking to make sure that as she comes into turn in and turn out, that she's not using that hip to roll in, roll forwards or roll backwards, which again, the wall would be a great place to try this again if dancers are having a hard time with that, or if you're having a hard time with it. And I think people sometimes are humbled by what kind of turnout they do or do not have when working in this position. Kinnison, was that 5?
That was 5, yeah.
Excellent. All right, go on to the other side. Cool. So she's going to start with her left hand on her hip. Good. And then she's going to flex her foot and bring her foot up to parallel, making sure, right, she doesn't get any motion from above her hip. And then I want you to keep your hand there if you can and go ahead and turn out. Good. Just from the thigh, just a space hold. Turn in. It's a hard one. Yes.
This is really hard.
It's really hard. Turn out. So Kinnison, keep going until you hit 30. I'm not 34. That's the number of people in this room until you hit 5. I also have had a lot of people. I mean, this one is advanced in some respects for sure. There's a lot of things going on. I've had people do it with a knee bent as well, so that we have a shorter lever arm, and so that it's easier. Great. So this is another space in which I would actually say kinesin, like, I can't quite tell because I'm not really bird's eye, but make sure that you're not arching from your mid back. Good. All right. Excellent. So, um, great. All right. We've done all three of the ones that I want you to do on the floor. We're going to introduce one more standing. And I asked Kiniston to bring some tape because I often find that tape, this exercise can be really difficult, and tape is a really great visual aid. So she has two little pieces of tape. I'm going to have her put one on her patella or her kneecap. And I'm going to have her put one on her second toe. Okay, now this is tricky for dancers and for dancers sometimes and explaining this concept. So Kiniston looks like she's pretty much like, when Kiniston, you're in parallel, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Kiniston looks pretty much like, you know, her kneecap is generally over her second toe. Not everyone's anatomy is the same, so you're not always going to have someone with this same picture. I think what's most important to note throughout the exercise that I'm about to show you is that the relationship of your patella or your kneecap and your second toe should remain the same as when you start in parallel. Or your parallel throughout the whole exercise. So again, like, don't force someone to have their kneecap over their second toe. Like, that's just not how everybody works. Okay, so what Kiniston is going to do, again, this is kind of like, can be a little bit more advanced, and sometimes I wait to show this one to people. Can you actually bring your camera up a little bit so I can see a little bit more of your hips? So, excellent, good. But we are assuming Kiniston is proficient. I will be, whoever just asked that question, I will be saving this to the Dance Med story. And so you should be able to see it for at least another 24 hours. Okay, so she's going to plie and shift her weight onto her right leg and pick up her left leg. Okay, great. So from here, she's going to maintain, again, this same orientation of her kneecap over her second toe. Again, that's her orientation, but this same relationship as she turns her hips out to the left. And as you see, I mean, that was really subtle, but she moved in a tiny, tiny bit. So Kiniston, use those hip external rotators that we talked about before to turn out. That's better. And then turn all the way in. And then Kiniston, I would just say to you, are you in a pelvic neutral or are you in a little anterior pelvic tilt right now?
Anterior pelvic tilt.
Yeah, man. So fix that. And then
this is hard. This is hard.
I know it's really hard. I'm sorry. And then she's gonna turn out again. So she's gonna go ahead and do, I'm gonna take this off. She's gonna go ahead and do about 4 more. And if she's doing this right, again, she shouldn't be feeling like her butt is clenching. And what I sometimes have people do, ooh, she's falling out. Yeah, called out. Sorry, Kim. And sometimes what I have people do is to actually palpate their glute max to make sure, AKA put their fingers on their big glute muscles to make sure that it's not super tense as they're doing this exercise. And for Kiniston, sorry, Kin, no offense, I might actually back her up to do a couple other things before I take her into this, because I can tell she's having a hard time maintaining neutral pelvis while and torso erect while she's showing what we want her to. But Kiniston, awesome. So she go ahead to valiant effort. Go ahead to the other side.
This is hard.
It's really hard. And thank you for volunteering to do this without, you know, us going through these together. Awesome. Good. So again, and she doesn't have the tape here. The tape is, what I was saying before, a really awesome visual aid for if you're in the studio and you have a mirror and you're trying to teach the person like just how much or how little the knee is or is not moving, et cetera, et cetera. Great. And relax. What would be my regression? Well, you've had many patients have difficulty with this. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, like, there are so many different ways to regress. I mean, it depends what the problem is. Yes, it really depends what the problem is, right? So if the problem is that they are having a really hard time accessing their deep hip external rotators and standing, then I might have them go on to some of those turnout discs to teach them about how to access those in a standing position. Obviously, this is after I've prepped them a lot in a sideline position. Yes, correct, Misty. The last question. I'll get to that in a second. If the problem is that they're having a really hard time like controlling the anterior pelvic tilt, I might try to, or the placement of the torso. I might need to look and see, like, is that because there's a glute med issue? Is that because we haven't worked enough on, you know, her lumbopelvic control, aka the control of her core into her hips, right? You have to be a bit of a detective to see like where exactly it's decompensating before you go ahead and regress it. I'm sorry, that's not a direct answer. Miss Tanya, I assume you don't want the supporting knee to rotate when working leg is opening it. Yes, correct. So everything should stay in alignment. Okay, so I showed you all 4 of the exercises. You can try them on high kneeling too before standing. Yeah, absolutely. So if the patella is not forward in line with the second toe, how would you condition that? AKA bowed legs. Well, so it depends. You have to really understand like what that individual's parallel is, right? So I help them find their parallel regarding like by helping them figure out like when their patellas are forward, right? Or if they are anteroverted or retroverted, you have to deal with that too. And then the bottoms of their feet will fall where they may. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do our post test. So Kinnison is going to stand in her first position, and she's going to bring her arms out to the side, and she's going to do her 4 tendus to the front, 4 tendus to the side, 4 tendus to the back, etc. And we ask the question like, hey, did anything get better? If so, great. Did anything not get better? Okay, well then maybe we didn't have that issue in the first place, or maybe we didn't like nail your particular issue. We're just giving you some blanket ideas for exercises at this point anyway. Or did anything stay the same? Great. And I've had people say recently like things from like, yes, I felt more on my standing leg, to I didn't feel my feet grip as much, and all that jazz. So Kinnison, thank you super much for being my demo volunteer. You were super awesome. Really appreciate you. I don't know. We decided like if she leaves and I get like boxed out, I'm going to come right back so I can start to answer a couple of questions. But we'll
try.
Okay. Okay, it's just me. So if anyone has a couple of questions, let's start with some dancers first, as that's who I was hopefully gearing this towards. I'd be happy to answer any that you have. And I will take a sip of water because I just talked for 30 minutes straight. So I guess maybe then I should say thank you. Did I answer the questions that were asked before? What was the original issue that these interventions were addressing? Oh, so we were just talking about turnout. We talked about where you get most of your turnout from, where otherwise you can compensate. And we showed you some exercises for stronger, healthier turnout that were hip centric. I hope that answered that question. To people who asked me questions previously, did I answer those for you, or do you need a little bit more from me? Unfortunately, as a PT, you all know it's not always straightforward, but it depends type of situation. What are the dangers of overusing a TFL in the turnout? So listen, what I tend to see is that great. I'm glad I'm answered. So what I tend to see is the TFL is like a pretty big compensator, right? We also see it as a compensator when doing extensions, like to the front and to the side, for example, not necessarily to the back because it doesn't do hip extension. And what I tend to see is that throws off the way that the joint works and glides a little bit, so that people tend to get pinching in the hip. Now, obviously, that's not everyone, but that is one pattern that I tend to see a lot of, especially in pre-professional dancers in the studios. And we had that too um, in one of the dance companies that I worked in, where people didn't have strong enough psoas. This is obviously going outside of the turnout realm, but like some of these people were trying to grip their turnout from their TFL, and then on top of that, we had a piece that had a lot of like extension front and side, and they didn't have conditioned turnout or deep hip flexor muscles, and because of that, we had a lot of pinchy hips. And once we fixed the turnout and the deep hip flexor problem, then that fixed the pinchy problem. I hope that answered that. That was a bit of a roundabout thing. Yes, I will be saving this live if I am that technically savvy, but I'm pretty sure I am. Okay, so what would I recommend for a dancer who gets very tight or overused hip flexors? So I think what um, I think what sorry, I just got Isabel, I got distracted by yours, and I agree. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is recognize the difference between the deep hip flexors and the superficial hip flexors. And the deep hip flexors are really important for being the um, primary drivers of hip flexion activities. So, for example, developes to the front and side, or they're super active in Graham and Horton and a bunch of other things like that. And if those are not strong enough, then they will. Tightness is usually a symptom of something else. It's not usually like tightness doesn't just exist by itself. So we have to be fact finders again and see like, all right, do they feel tight because they're actually weak and we need to strengthen them? And then do the superficial muscles feel tight because they're being used too much and our deep hip flexors aren't strong enough? So that's one specific example. But again, you have to be a fact finder. What I often find though is that people's deep hip flexors are just not strong enough to withstand the demands that we place on them. How often should these 4 exercises be done? Oh no, Isabel, don't even worry about it. Like that was a good point. How often should these 4 exercises be done? Well, I would recommend, like, if these work for you, then I would use them before class as part of your warm up, because what they are kind of helping to do is tap into stabilization systems and muscles that will help you achieve a healthier turnout. So as long as you're not super fatiguing yourself before going into class, I would put them before the classes you take, but always be sure to give yourself a day off. What do I suggest for the young dancers or student who has limited range of motion and turnout ability to not get frustrated and continue to work? Oh man. Well, you have to, so Sarah, that's like a really great question. What she's just asking, like, okay, if you have someone who has a limited range of motion, like how do you encourage them, I guess, right, to use what they have instead of compensating? I think a part of that is like setting up an environment in which it's okay to work with what you have been given. And by what you've been given, I mean like what your anatomy provides you, and educating your dancers on safe practices. And then obviously, I mean, it would be really great if your fellow teachers also could be on board with that as well, right? Because I think if dancers understand that from the get-go and have an environment in which they can just be who they are and use what they have, then they'd be more inclined to not force it. However, I mean, like that's really difficult. I think what might be helpful, and maybe you could try this, is like ask them to balance, in a way in which they're compensating and trying to force the turnout, and then ask them to balance again using the turnout that they have in their hips and their body, or find another dance position in which you can say like, hey, like be here or do this step forcing your turnout. Hey, be here, do this step without forcing your turnout. And typically what I find is when they use the turnout that they have more balance, control, stability, etc., which for some people is enough. Recreational dance. So old school mentality was forced turnout. Yes, absolutely. Trying to change the next generation of kids, which is hard, if you have fellow teachers or coworkers not working in the same mindset. Yeah, I mean, listen, I agree, but we have to fight the good fight and keep going uphill together, and we'll get there eventually, is my personal feeling. What do you mean, recreational dance? Get it on. How do you know how to pronounce that? So if there aren't any other questions that come in the next like minute or two, I will probably wrap it up here. However, personal plug, I'm I'm on Dance Med's page now, right? And you saw my handle. So if any of you have questions that are lingering beyond, or you think of something tomorrow or something didn't quite work for you, please feel free to reach out. My handle is at Marissa T. Schaefer _DPT. As I mentioned before, I am here in New York in the eye of the storm, and I will be not going anywhere. So if you're ever in New York and you want to say hi or ask more questions, you're absolutely welcome to do so. Thank you all so much. Not sure how I save your video for further reference. I will be attempting to save it on Dance Med's story, and I'll tag myself. Actually, I don't know how to tag myself, but I will try. Thank you all. Would love to see other exercises, interventions in the future. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, a lot of stuff was canceled due to COVID. My jobs were, I'm virtual, but a lot of things were closed. Great. Oh, watching from the UK. That's awesome. I'm so glad. Anyway, to all of you, thank you so much. I will now try to tag myself and then save everything. And then, encourage you all to reach out with questions that you have. And I appreciate all of your enthusiasm. It's been awesome. So goodbye, as I now try to first tag myself. I don't know how to do that. Nope. That's okay. I just won't. Oh, midnight in Cape Town? I'm honored. Thank you so much. I'll be asleep by then. All right, I will actually be signing off. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.